So I'm going to talk to you about laser, learning from authoritative security experiment results. So it's all about cybersecurity experimentation. So you've probably heard a lot of pushes for bringing scientific rigor into cybersecurity R&D, for allowing for reproducibility of results, so that we can share and build on each other's results. There's a lot of initiatives now in cybersecurity conferences to produce and share cybersecurity artifacts in support of all this. So laser is sort of trying to promote all of that and focus on learning from and improving cybersecurity experiment results. We try to have a very interactive, collegial environment in which we try to be truly a workshop, not just a mini conference or symposium where there's a series of presentations, but actual discussion and learning among the participants of the experimental methodologies, execution, and results. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is have a dramatic change in the way the community applies experimentation to its research and improve the quality of the science that we as computer scientists and engineers are doing. So what we've seen is that we're still struggling to keep up, right? It's sort of an asymmetric challenge. Challenges brought on by new technology are mounting, and research trying to address these has traditionally been very slow. We believe this is due in part to a number of different issues. And so one of them, the first one you see here, is learning from reporting from unsuccessful or unanticipated results, leading to a reduction in the repetition of past failures. So there's an emphasis on having good, positive, successful results in order to get your papers accepted and presented here. And you don't hear so much about the unsuccessful, the unreported results. In fact, the workshop wasn't always called laser. At first, there were some folks who wanted to call it loser, which basically, learning from unreported, security experimentation results. But we decided that wasn't exactly the impression we wanted to give everybody, so we came up with laser. Making sure that there's adequate reporting of the experiment so that people understand exactly what it is you did in order to achieve your results, and then making sure that you have adequate scientific rigor, that you're using solid methodologies and execution that really support and lead to reliable and conclusive results. So what we have been doing, and we've been doing this since 2020, is we invite authors of accepted papers at NDSS, and we also run this at ACSAC, the annual Computer Security Applications Conference, to present the experimental aspects of their work. So it's a little bit different than all the other symposia and workshops that the others here are doing. So we're not inviting submissions. We're not having a program committee. We're not, reviewing the papers and then, selecting, with an acceptance rate. Rather, I issue a call. It just so happens I'm one of the organizers at both of these events. I'm the publications chair for NDSS. I have access to Hot CRP. If I didn't, then I would ask the program chairs to do this. But I send a message out to all the authors of accepted papers. So if you had an accepted paper, you probably recall getting an invitation from me to present your experimental results at Laser. And I do it as sort of a first come, first serve. And I do that in part as incentive to people to not wait around, but to let me know, are you interested in doing this? And amazingly, I actually get an incredible response, and I've never had trouble filling the agenda. We usually have about 6 or 7. I think we have 6 this year, papers. And we get a very interesting mix. It's not stacked in any one direction. So it's across all the different areas. A lot of cybersecurity experimentation, a lot of cybersecurity test beds have focused more on networking, but we don't get just networking. We get everything, including federated learning, including usable security, a very nice mix. These authors lead a focused discussion on the experimental approaches and methodologies, and I've got a few slides later that'll tell you more about some of the meta questions we ask and some of the experimental aspects that we prompt them to talk about. And we have this discussion. And I'll show you the structure, the format we use to try to elicit this. And then we invite those authors to write new papers that are focused on the experimental work. And this is a really incredible opportunity, because when you think about it, you don't get to write that paper and submit it to a conference like NDSS or ACSAC. You've got to focus on the actual results, and then you write that and you move on to your next paper. So here we're inviting them to actually write a paper. It gets ad hoc reviews, so it does go through some kind of a peer review process. It's just not your traditional program committee. It's similar to what would happen if you submit to a journal an article. So you get ad hoc reviews. And in theory, the paper could be guided in part by some of the discussions, the feedback you get from the other participants during the interactions at the workshop. So we've been doing this now since 2020. So if you look at sort of our timeline, this actually started 10 years ago. It was started in part by Jeremy Epstein, who you all may know is here from the National Science Foundation. My colleague, Laura Tennell, or former colleague at SRI International, by Carrie Gates, our general chair. They were all involved. Also, some other folks, a guy named Greg Shannon, were involved in the beginning. And we started out as a traditional workshop with the invited papers and the keynote and the panel and all that. And that was like, it was okay. It wasn't great. We didn't co-locate. We did it at SRI International in Roslyn, Virginia, in the DC metropolitan area. It worked out okay. We did experiment. Number 4 here, you'll see we co-located with IEEE S&P, but it was still the traditional format. And then we sort of had this hiatus in which we were trying to decide, do we really want to keep doing this? It's not clear that we're getting the uptake that we wanted. And that's when we had sort of this aha moment in terms of, let's take this existing, group of authors who have work, who might be relegated to talking about their experimental work in a paragraph, in a section, in a page. Some of the conferences are better than others in terms of allowing that as part of your main paper, but to be able to really do a deep dive on that, it's like, let's give that a try. So we ran an experiment. We did it here 3 years ago with NDSS 2020. We did it again with ACSAC, and you can see the next 3 were all virtual. And then last year when we returned in person here, we did it again. We just did one in ACSAC a couple months ago, and we're doing it again here on Friday. I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time, but these slides will be made available. I always like to point people at other work that's out there around cybersecurity experimentation and test beds and artifacts and the like. Right now, the key organizers are myself. I recently went from SRI International to USC ISI, and my former colleague, Laura Tennell. Hashtag Laser 2023. The format, we try to be a true workshop in that we focus on this discussion and interaction. The authors lead the group in this discussion. Here's a link to the program page. It's on the NDSS page off of the main program page. We have additional information about the workshop, the abstracts, the bios, links to the papers once they're published post-workshop are all there. These are some of the areas of interest that we ask the authors to focus on. So things like, what were your research questions and hypotheses? What were the experimental methodologies you used or developed? Your experiment design? What kind of experimental infrastructure did you use? Simulation, emulation, virtualization, physical test beds, and the like. And you can see the various, all the way down to measurements and metrics and analytical techniques. So just imagine the entire experimental life cycle. So all the way from conception all the way to I'm analyzing my data and coming to my conclusions. Some interesting meta questions that we asked. Did you use artifacts borrowed from the community? Did you attempt to actually replicate or reproduce results of earlier research as part of your work? What did you do that others could learn from? Your experience. What did you try that did not succeed before getting to the results you presented? So what were your losers, so to speak? And did you produce any intermediate results, including possible unsuccessful tests or experiments? Here's the format. We try to encourage the authors to limit their discussion of the paper to no more than 10 minutes, because you're going to present, or you have presented, the paper. Discuss the experiments or the evaluations that were performed, including those areas of interest that I just listed, and then lead the group in a discussion of the meta questions, and then a final discussion in terms of what are next steps and what are your thoughts and plans and any feedback you might get from the audience on the post-workshop paper. Here's the agenda for this Friday. So you can see the various papers coming off of the NDSS program that will be deep diving into the experimental methods. We do have a keynote talk. My colleague, Jelena Markovic from USC ISI on cybersecurity experimentation of the future. She's going to talk about the results of a workshop that we ran back in December. A few more papers to wrap up, and that's it. And in the interest of time, I think we've got one more. I won't say much more about the workshop papers. So basically, in a sense, this has been an experiment. Our hypotheses are that authors are excited about sharing their experimental methods, and more or less, this has been supported. They're interested in learning about other researchers' experimental methods. Again, this has been generally supported. And finally, our third hypothesis, they can all work together collaboratively to try to advance the state of experimentation in cybersecurity research. And again, I believe this has been supported. We're continuing to go strong at both NDSS and ACSAC. And so thank you very much. I appreciate a chance to talk to you about Laser.